Okay, hello everyone. My name is Kalina Francois.
And my name is Jasmine Bennett.
And my name is Loraya Nash.
I'm Maya Goldfield.
I'm Gianna Gwynn.
And I'm Lazy Lemonius.
And then our topic is Black women and mass incarceration. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is the criminalization of Black women, the statistics. Women of color are overrepresented in the prison system. A Bureau of Justice study found that 358 of every 100,000 Black women, 152 of every 100,000 Latinas, and 94 of every 100,000 white women were in prison. Okay, and a lot of Black women are getting arrested for things like substance abuse, and unlike men's substance abuse, women's substance abuse is often tied into their past histories of trauma and abuse. More than half of the women in state prisons and local jails report having been physically and or sexually abused in the past. The Bureau of Justice found that women were 3 times more likely than men to have been physically or sexually abused prior to incarceration. So women are entering the prison system with trauma already. Okay, the Institute for Women's Policy Research reports that more than 20% of Black women are raped during their lifetimes, a higher share than among women overall. Black women were 2.5 times more likely to be murdered by men than their white counterparts, and more than 9 of 10 Black female victims knew their killers. And lastly, Black women also experience significantly higher rates of psychological abuse, including humiliation, insults, name-calling, and coercive control than do women overall. Next slide. Here's another statistic. The overall incarceration rate for Black women was 3.8 times higher than the rate of white women. Next slide.
Okay, so some abuse that Black women face in prison is medical neglect. They face sexual abuse and cruel and unusual punishment. So some medical neglect, like failure to refer seriously like ill inmates for treatment, sexual abuse by correctional officers, and other inmates who they're likely to get raped, groped, or victimized through other types of sexual coercion. Cruel and unusual punishment, so sometimes they're beaten, degraded, disemboweling, or overly painful, torturous, or humiliating things happen to them. So this is a quick video. It's about a minute long of someone's story. Her name is, I can't really remember. Play the video. Chantelle.
Pause really quickly for us to hear it. When you share your video, there's a, if you look, when you click share screen, there's a checkbox at the bottom that says share computer sound, I think. So make sure you check that, and then we should be able to hear it.
Please, man. You're breathing or you wouldn't be screaming.
Well, video obtained by Channel 3 gave an overhead view of what happened before.
You can see from the video that this is not something that this was new to this group of people. Just their reactions lead to that inevitable conclusion that this is a ritual of torture that they engage in time and again.
I sat in that chair that day and prayed over and over again that I wouldn't die.
Glass had been arrested during a domestic incident at a relative's house and booked on an old traffic warrant. She claims she had asked several times to make a call, only to be abused for asking. One of the officers says she threatened to kick him, and you see her lift her leg before he goes for her face.
You can see from the video that she didn't try and kick him until he hurt her.
Tonight, officers Robert Marsh and Idris Fareed Clark have been indicted on multiple charges, including assault. Both pleaded not guilty, while Glass was detained for 48 hours, spending time in this cell, ultimately never being charged. body camera video turned on.
Okay, and these are just some highlights of what happened. So she did make a simple request to let someone know she was arrested, and it turned into a violent attack. So it all started when she refused to pick up a spoon. One of the correctional officers asked her to pick up a spoon, and she refused to, and it led to that. Both officers stopped Glass to they strapped her to a restraint chair. They punched her, and shot pepper spray in her face. She suffers from asthma, so she could hardly breathe. During the 2 hours, the officers left her tied to a chair in a small isolated cell, and the pepper spray was also burning her lungs. She said everything was burning. I really can't believe it happened. I thought I was going to die. So this is like all around social media, so I thought it was kind of relevant. Her name is Crystal Kaiser. She's a Milwaukee woman. She killed a man who sexually assaulted her and other underage girls, and she was 17 years old when she killed Randall Voller, I think, and set fire to his home in 2018. So she was charged with 5 felonies, including first-degree intentional homicide and use of dangerous weapon. So she was underage when 34-year-old Valor sexually assaulted her. She described him pinning her to the ground and forcefully on that night when she was killed. So she lashed out on him after years of abuse. So the case represents the failures of the criminal justice system to protect young victims of sexual abuse, and that state laws meant to help those victims are being brushed aside, while Black girls and women are being disproportionately affected.
Okay, back to the facts. Black women in socioeconomic factors. Only 40% of all incarcerated women had been employed full-time before incarceration. 2/3 of women had never held a job that paid more than $6.50 an hour. About 37% earned less than $600 a month. Only 40% obtained their GED or high school diploma before arrest, and 65% of women report being mothers to children under the age of 18. And this is from Resistance Behind Bars. Next slide, please.
Okay, so now let's look at the impact from women being incarcerated on the inside. One of the main impacts is mental health. Mental health is a major factor when speaking on women in incarceration. According to Manuel Villa in the article, The Mental Health Crisis Facing Women in Prison, 66% of women in prison reported having a history of mental disorder. Mental health is something that is poorly provided to women that are incarcerated, causing many women to be poorly treated on the inside. The impact on the outside affects the family, the career, and your education of the Black woman or women, period. Family, their children, especially single mothers, their children are without their mother, and they really can't grow up with their mom, which is a very unfortunate situation for single mothers. Career-wise, Black women are forced to work minimum wage jobs to take care of their children because of a charge that they have. Education, usually their education is interrupted due to imprisonment. So that's the impacts on the outside.
Okay, and this is a quote from Victoria Law in her book, Resistance Behind Bars. Additionally, incarcerated women who raise their voices face an additional burden. They have already defied societal norms by transgressing both laws and acceptable notions of feminine behavior and morality. And so Black women, when they do speak up, they are defying societal norms. And a lot of Black women don't like to speak up because they're scared of what society might do to them, or if it'll make their sentences longer or things like that. Next slide, please.
Oh, the other. Okay, so oh. The incarceration of women begins with the trends in policing of girls and young women, and today women make up 33% of those who are referred to law enforcement and arrested on school grounds, but they're only 16% of the female population that's Black women. And there's a negative perception of these Black women and girls, and treated as they're treated roughly, almost as rough as boys, and they're called disrespectful and aggressive and difficult. And this correlates with their harsh treatment and when they're sexualized and masculinized and stripped of their humanity. And Americans perceive Black girls to require less nurturing and less protection, know more about sex, and be more independent than their white peers. And then the next. And there are social and economic inequalities that impact incarceration, with 40% of the incarcerated women having full-time employment, and then 40% with a GED, then 30% utilizing public assistance. And then this also relates to over-policing and unequal sentencing.
Okay, so now when discussing mental and physical health while incarcerated and the impacts of that, Black women in prison are at extremely high risk for multiple infectious and sexually transmitted diseases such as HIV. Prisons themselves don't take very high concern about diseases as they spread throughout. 25 to 60% of incarcerated women require mental health services, and very few of these percentage receive them. Prisons usually don't have the resources necessary. 60% of inmates suffer from drug dependence, and then on top of that, another 30% suffer from alcoholic tendencies, and then similarly, 1/3 suffer from PTSD. So there's like a lot of issues occurring with these prisoners themselves. However, instead of providing the necessary tools and treatment for people to recover, to try to attempt to better themselves, prisons will often either do nothing and just let them suffer, or counterintuitively, they'll over-medicate inmates in order to ease their symptoms and in order to make them more complacent. Yeah. Okay, so now this is switching topics a little bit. This is the story of Erica Thompson. She was a pregnant Black woman from Florida who was arrested for violating her probation due to a traffic violation. She was then arrested and held in a jail cell, and while she was there, she told the officers that she was experiencing contractions, that the stress of the situation had brought up an early labor. However, they overlooked her. They did not really do anything, and so she gave birth in that jail cell. And because of these conditions, her child was born prematurely in that county jail and then died later that day. So this is a clear example of neglect to the Black woman within the confines of a prison. Yeah. So then more on Black inmates and pregnancy. It's estimated that over 50,000 pregnant women are arrested each year. And within the prisons, there is an extreme lack of pre- and postnatal care. The women are often given very little information about what's about to occur to them. They don't realize that they will be chained up during these birthing processes, and afterwards they'll be given less than 48 hours to spend with their child before they're forced to give it up. There's also very little postpartum treatment. They don't have all the equipment and tools necessary. So like those extra large pads that help with bleeding after you give birth, and like the medications necessary to help treat postpartum symptoms aren't there for these women. Black women in heavily incarcerated areas are also much more likely to give birth to an underweight, premature, unhealthy baby. So there are actual statistics on how healthy the baby is when they're born. And in heavily incarcerated areas, as a Black woman, you're much more likely to have an unhealthy child.
Like mentioned earlier, they're only given 24 to 48 hours before the baby's taken away, and then their body proceeds to go through withdrawals, which causes a period of lactating without a baby to feed, and heavy bleeding without the proper products to care for them. And since laws are now being passed to ban abortions, there are periods where incarcerated women are now dying and losing their babies inside the prisons, and then like being charged, because what can they do in this matter of time?
Okay, mass incarceration and how it should be handled.
The First Step Act aims to reduce recidivism. Recidivism is the tendency to relapse into a previous condition or mode of behavior, especially relapse into criminal behavior. The relatively high rate of recidivism among released offenders are centered on the offender's educational literacy, lack of vocational job skills, lack of interpersonal skills, or criminal history.
A big plus of the First Step Act is the curbing of mandatory minimums. The First Step Act provides more opportunity for flexibility regarding mandatory minimum sentences, allowing someone to be sentenced based on character and circumstances rather than only on guidelines forced on the courts. This will take into account the circumstances of people of color, the socioeconomic disadvantages.
Additionally, the First Step Act places prisoners in facilities close to home, expands women's rights, gives individuals an increase in good time credit, and increase in funding for job training and educational programs, and implements greater use of halfway houses in the home confinement system.
Now, this is all a small step in the right direction, but however, we believe in order to see true change, the current prison system needs to be abolished and a new prison system that does not benefit off of the labor of Blacks needs to be created. And thank you for listening. Hashtag support Black women, Black mental health matters, abolish America's prison system, defend Black lives, defund cages, create social change, and pro-choice. Thank you.